I'd like to look at the idea of meditation, but I don't want to go down the road of any form of practice, so I'm not really associating meditation with any system. So I'm just trying to look at the actual value of the word, or the meaning of the word meditation, without any sense of context. So it's not meditation about anything. So it's not really about spiritual practice. It's not about achieving anything. It's not about, you might say, going anywhere psychologically or psychically. So as I sit here now in meditation, as I want to talk about it, I have to refer to the spiritual dimension of the One. The One is ever present. It's a living fact right now. And that living fact of the One is meditation. You could say one is in meditation. Oneself in the One is meditation. So meditation, being the One, is oneself. Just as you say that the body is using the eyes to see, and that seeing opens up the whole of the physical reality around you. So you can see the trees, or you can see the sky, and at night you see the stars. So the self seeing in the One is meditation. So you could say it's the meditation of the seer. If you contrast that with consciousness, it's the meditation of the knower. Now, in consciousness, the knower is constituted of the knower and the known. So if you're looking at a tree, you're the knower and that's the known, and you're meditating on the known. So if you look in the Oxford English Dictionary, and it talks about meditation, it means to ponder, to dwell deeply on something. So you could say a scientist will ponder, meditate on the depth of the quantum field. Or in Jungian psychology, you will go in depth into the psyche. So you have the knower and the known, or you have the experiencer and the experienced, or the observer and the observed. So you could say that as a scientist is meditating on the quantum field, there is a kind of duality between the observer and the observed. So the scientist is looking at a particular aspect of the quantum field, say subatomic particles. And as they go deeply into that, you could say there's a kind of relationships formed, which is a kind of intimacy with what's being looked at. So the scientist is very intimately involved in the behavior of the quantum field. And when you create that intimacy, you might say that contact with the field, and you're really looking at the behavior of the subatomic particles as they become waves and the waves become particles, you could say there's a form of unity. So you have observer-observed duality and you have observer-observed unity. And you can achieve that by consciousness. So an artist can achieve that by a painting. So they begin to paint images and they're observing the canvas and they're making marks on the canvas. But when you get to a certain point creatively and things begin to take shape, then you could say there's an intimacy built up because things are beginning to be unified or integrated. And so you might say the artist achieves a level of order within the chaos of the canvas and begins to create this unity of observation, so that when somebody looks at the picture, they're looking at something orderly, integrated and complete. And that's what all artistic people do. And that's what you do when you compose music, when you think about scientific experiments. Now, when you're in the spiritual dimension of the one, then you're moving from duality to unity to oneness. So, as I look out of the window now, everything I see, literally everything I see, is one. And that's the distinction between the psyche or consciousness, and the spiritual dimension. The spiritual dimension is one. So the whole field of observation, observation, that doesn't apply. That's within the field of consciousness. So that's why there's a distinction between the psyche or consciousness, which is observation, and the spiritual, which is meditation. So I think that what goes on, what people think is meditation within consciousness, is really observation. In observation, in consciousness and thought and knowledge, the field of knowledge, there's always a structure. So wherever there's a structure, there's order. In pure meditation, when I look at the world, there is no structure. There are things in the world, there's a totality of things in the world which can either be in duality or unity according to observation and consciousness. But to spiritual perception, the one, everything is one. There's no structure. The perception in meditation allows you to see everything as a whole. So you could say the totality within the one is an integrated whole. And you could call that holistic perception. So in meditation, as it's occurring now, I can look at the world and look around the world, look at the various things without there being an observer. So I can look at the tree, I've just looked at the crow landing on the castle. And as I look, I'm always in a state of oneness. So in a sense, I can look all around, but there's no focus, there's no concentration, which is observation. There's no attention, which is observation. There's just simply looking. And as I noticed activity around me, all of that activity, the sounds I hear, the birds flying around, the wind in the trees, that's all one motion, that's all one movement. But in the one, in meditation, there is no movement in meditation. I can look at the world and it's in movement, but there's no movement in meditation. So if I close my eyes and I'm not looking at anything, then there's a stillness. There's a kind of equilibrium, and there's nothing. So the oneness meditation is a meditation in emptiness, and that's called shunyata. And in Tibetan Buddhism, that's the one mind. In Zen, which means meditation, the idea is to enter satori, which is enlightenment. So meditation is enlightenment. And enlightenment is the illumination of the one. Another thing you notice in meditation, in the one, is there's no time and there's no space. So as I'm looking now, in the one, there is no time psychologically in my consciousness, because consciousness isn't operating. At the moment, consciousness is, you might say, quiet. Consciousness is not operating, it's not interfering as I'm seeing. So as I'm seeing, without observation, without measurement, without duality and unity, as I'm seeing, there is no space between myself and the castle. There is no time, moment to moment. There's simply the looking, which is in the emptiness of meditation. So you can't refer to the present, you can't refer to the now, you can't refer to any form of sequence of time. So it's not like saying meditation is in the now, because the now as a specification doesn't exist. So even the idea of living in the present or living in the now doesn't apply. And also that in the one, that meditation is freedom. So you're literally free of any content, you're free of any observation, you're free of any knowledge, you're free of any conceptual idea of time and space or physical universe or mental universe or thought or anything like that. Those categories of psyche and body, or physical and psychic, they're irrelevant, they don't come into it. So when self is seeing in the one, there is no reference to anything, there's no reference to a context, There's no need to define anything. You're not doing anything, you're not becoming anything, you're not related to anything. So when I look outside, I'm not related to that through any content, any context. So I'm looking out, and in consciousness I give thought and name to the castle, to the birch trees, to the red brick buildings. But in meditation, there is no identity. There is no need to have an identity. So as I sit here, myself in meditation is free of any psychological identity. So I'm not relating through any form of personality or identity or ego or reference to the past. In meditation, there is no belonging to anything. You don't belong to the world, you don't belong to the house, you don't belong to other people, you don't belong to a physical universe, you don't belong to the psyche, to dreams, to thoughts, to memories. Self in the one doesn't belong anywhere because self is one. There is no relationship, there is no dependence. There's simply the openness to life as a whole. And life as a whole would be synonymous with reality as a whole. So the life of reality as a whole, you're open to that. The one isn't something you achieve. You don't meditate to be in the one. You don't meditate to achieve the one. It's not a goal. It's not a mystical goal called God. It's not that you climb the mountain to go to the top to meet the Lord. It has nothing to do with searching for self-realization. All of those processes are processes of observation. The observer and the observed, which is duality, seeks to become the observer-observed unity. But that's still within the field of consciousness. So if you achieve your goal, you seek and find something, then that's still within consciousness. If you're a person that's seeking within a meditational practice, say within Buddhism, and you have the ideal of the Buddha, so you want to unite with the Buddha, you want to find your Buddha nature. But any concept, any ideal, any form within your psyche, any form of entity, any form of mandala, that unity with Buddha is still within the psyche, is still within observation and consciousness. So in Zen Buddhism, they, when you are free in the one, then you can say there is no Zen, which is meditation, there is no Satori, which is enlightenment, there is no practice, there is no posture. So you might say, going beyond the identification with the ideal of the Buddha is to negate any form of identification. In meditation, you're not solving any problems. In observation, in consciousness, you're always solving problems. So meditation in consciousness is always about solving problems. The problem of division. You're in duality and you want unity. You're in a relationship with another person, things are going wrong and you want unity. If two people were in the one, two selves were in the one, there would be no problems. So as long as you're in consciousness, you're in what I would call the problem-solving field. So in nature, everything in nature, you might say, literally, is solving the problem of survival. So the whole momentum of nature is predicated on that need for survival. In society, there's a hierarchy, and the artist needs the hierarchy in order to earn money, gain a reputation, and so gain a form of status. So if you're an artist and you enter into the world of society, then you're buying into the hierarchy. It's an inevitable thing that there will be a hierarchy. And so you might say psychological survival is dependent on the hierarchy. Whereas if you were painting pictures and you never showed them to anybody, then you wouldn't be participating in society, you wouldn't be participating in the hierarchy. So you might say in nature the hierarchy is a kind of predatory field. And I would say the same in society. The social structure, the hierarchy, is very predatory. So at every level there's a kind of control. So the ego, the identity within business, the identity within politics, the identity within science, within the military, is very competitive, is very territorial, protecting the status, and is very predatory. In meditation, in the one, there is nothing to gain and nothing to lose. So it's really irrelevant what's going on in the hierarchy. But if you're in the one, in your consciousness, like myself, I've written books and I want my ideas to be known, and I publish my books on Amazon, etc., then I'm part of that hierarchy, whether I like it or not. In the one, I'm free, but in consciousness, I can either remain anonymous, totally anonymous, or I try to communicate. In consciousness, everything's predicated on relationship. So even a person living alone, very isolated, living alone, they're still in relationship to society because their identity is being alone. Their identity is loneliness or depression or isolation. They still have an identity. In the one, the self in the one, does not have psychological problems in consciousness. So, self in the one, psychologically in consciousness, is able not to be psychological. That doesn't mean that psychology isn't involved in your relationship to the world. As I say, in my own case, if people respond to my books or interviews or videos, then I will be involved psychologically. But I don't have to create psychological problems. So the freedom of the self frees me from psychological problems because I don't have to see myself as my ego identity struggling against other people in society, struggling in relationship to get things right, to solve the problem. So that means that in consciousness, I can be totally involved in the world, totally involved in relationship, and yet know that I'm free in essence. Myself is free, but my identity, which for most people is very important, their ego identity as an artist, for example, is very important. Especially if you don't have self-awareness and you can't make that distinction between yourself and your identity, then you're going to put all of your attention into your identity because you can't distinguish it from yourself. But once you can distinguish self spiritually from the psychic identity, as it were, then you don't empower your identity in the same way other people do. So you wouldn't defend anything. You wouldn't be asserting anything, and you wouldn't be defending anything. So in relationship, you'll be looking, spiritually looking at the relationship within consciousness between your identity, as it were, say as a man, in relationship to the identity as a woman. So you'll be in relationship to a woman. The woman will behave as she does, and your behavior will be free of complications. So you'll see what's going on. If anything happens that the other person feels is a problem or a friction or a misunderstanding, then you listen and you put it right. Which means you're not in competition with the other person, therefore you're not in division with the other person. You're in oneness, and that oneness means that however the relationship is, for example, you may be getting along, which is a form of unity, and then things go wrong and there's a form of duality or conflict, division, and then you make up and there's a form of unity. But self is always one, and make sure that in that relationship the oneness is always operating, so that it's not dependent on duality and unity. So if you make a mistake, if I made a mistake in relationship, and I genuinely said the wrong thing, or felt the wrong thing, and the other person reacted to me and said that's not fair, or you did the wrong thing, or you misunderstood, or something like that, then I would immediately not do that. I could say I'm sorry, and I would not do that. That doesn't mean to say it won't happen again, but when I see the mistake, I simply know that. I just see it, and I know what I've done immediately. Because when I'm perceiving that, in the sense from a position of oneness, I immediately see the problem, because I'm not reacting to the problem, I'm not using my consciousness to gain ground or in competition or trying to defend myself or cover things up or deceive the other person. So being in the one does affect the way you see the world, the way you see relationship. But just because you're in the one doesn't mean that you know how to solve the problem of relationship. But all I'm saying is when a problem or a detail of a problem comes up, you deal with that immediate reaction and you put order there. Because you're seeing everything as an integrated whole, you immediately, you might say, integrate that problem. You bring order to that specific problem. So that negative reaction, as it were, that you might have said the wrong thing, or you might have disturbed someone's feelings or something like that, you admit immediately what the problem is. You immediately you might say negate it. And as I say, it may come up again, it may not. It's not about solving all the problems all of the time. And in fact, acting from the one isn't actually about solving problems, it's about doing the right thing. So doing the right thing is getting it right. And in Tibetan Buddhism, that's referred to as the Dharma, the law, which is in Chinese Taoism, it's the Tao, getting things right. So if you imagine the Tao is the way, so you're travelling along the way according to the Tao because you're in the one, the Tao is the great one. And then you know, as you travel along the way, as you're living your life, things crop up, things happen. Things can happen if you're driving a car, things can happen if you're walking down the street, things can happen within a community. So if I'm walking along by the river and there's a branch over the path, I see the problem and I remove the branch. And if other people walk by and they don't remove the branch, I don't think that they should remove the branch, but I remove the branch because it seems to be the intelligent thing to do, to put order, to clear the way. But if other people don't do it, then they don't do it. That's their affair. You know, I could say that's their karma, because everything that happens in your life is karma. And getting things right with your karma is what the Tao and the way is all about. The perfection of the one, which is the circle, can't be projected into consciousness and perfect the world. So your relationship with the world will never be perfect, even if you're in the one. From that position, things are holy, one and whole. But if you're acting physically in the world, or psychologically in your consciousness, you can't translate the one, perfection, eternity, into either the physical or the psychic. That's why Buddha couldn't solve all the problems, Christ couldn't solve all the problems. If you read the Gospels with Jesus, he was always in trouble with people. He's always in trouble with the political structure, the religious structure, even the social structure. See, in meditation, you don't meditate on anything. You're not meditating on anything. You're not meditating on the world. You're not meditating on nature. You're not meditating on your relationships. You're not meditating on the universe or the cosmos. You're not meditating on anything. You're just in meditation, and that's a category of its own. And if you then extend from that spiritual dimension, spiritual perceptions, which are attributes of the Buddha, so self in the one is in Buddhahood, and the spiritual perceptions of the diamond body, or the body of wisdom, which is the body of the self in the one. The spiritual perceptions include love, beauty, compassion, justice, and the essential one is what they refer to as Bodic insight, enlightened insight. And that would be the insight of intelligence. So the domain of the spiritual perceptions, you might say, the faculties, would be the intelligible realm, the realm of intelligence. So it's intelligent to love, it's intelligent to have compassion, it's intelligent to be ethical and just, it's intelligent to see the beauty in the world. So what that means is all of those faculties, those perceptions, are emanations of the one. So they're holistic. So if you have in your identity, in the world, in relationship, so you're living with someone, and something comes up in that relationship, and it's a bit of a problem, as I say, it's intelligent to put it immediately right, and say you're sorry, etc. Now you may be seeing that relationship from a position of love, but that love isn't solving a problem. The love isn't solving the problem. The intelligence, you might say, is you're putting something that's wrong, you're putting it in order, you're doing the right thing, because you see, like I say, there's the branch over the path, you move it away. If you've offended someone, then you immediately put it right. But that doesn't mean to say tomorrow another branch might be on the road, and tomorrow you might offend somebody in a different way. So you say you're sorry again, and you mean what you say. But that doesn't mean to say you'll never do that again. Because in consciousness, in your memory, in your behavior, there's no way to control the content of your consciousness. There's no way to control your memory. You can moderate your memory, you can discipline your memory to a degree, but you can't predict that tomorrow or the next day things won't be unpredictable. So even if there's love in a relationship, if you are perceiving that relationship with love, and you want that love, you want the other person, or let's put it this way, ideally it would be good if both people were free in the one, and there's love. But that doesn't mean to say someone who's self-aware in the one wouldn't have a relationship with someone that's not in the one, who's not self-aware. And in a way you may share your awareness with the other person because you're intimate and you're living together. You may share that, and the other person may understand that you're looking or perceiving in a different way, and you've explained what's going on. But what you make clear to the other person is they're under no obligation to try to conform to something perfect. And you would say, in consciousness, in relationship, not to expect perfection, not try to live up to the ideal of God or Jesus or Buddha or the One. You wouldn't impose that restriction, you wouldn't expect that. And the other person ought not to expect you to be perfect, because you're in the one. So in the life of Buddha or the life of Jesus or somebody like that, people, say within Christianity and Buddhism, maybe they would expect Jesus to be perfect. But that's not really the way to look at it. Or that's not the way to look at the idea of oneness or God or that kind of thing. It's a misunderstanding, misrepresentation of what a holy person is. It's in different categories. The one, the self in the one, is in a category. The identity, ego in consciousness and behaviour is in a category. And what you do in the physical world, in your body, is in a different category. They shouldn't be mixed up. See, in the one, there's freedom. But you're not free from anything, there's just pure freedom. So, in consciousness, you're always looking for something. You're always looking from the past into the future. You're always making something happen. If you're playing the piano and you're a pianist and you've got a schedule and you're doing things from the past, present, future, or you're raising children, or you're writing a book, etc., etc., and you're preoccupied, you're working something out. And if things go wrong, you want to solve that problem. And say there are problems in your life of a certain nature where you think that religion will solve your problem or spirituality will solve your problem. And so you see the goal of nirvana, the goal of self-realization, the goal of satori, enlightenment, as a kind of freedom from problems. I.e. the world, if all the world was one, it would be free of its problems. If you as a person were in the one, or had God on your side, or Buddha or Jesus, then you wouldn't have any psychosocial problems, emotional problems. Well, I'm afraid it's actually not like that. Consciousness is consciousness, and there will always be problems. There will always be activities that you can't control. I mean, the ego tries to control everything in business, in politics. And if you've got 7 billion people on this planet, and people are trying to manage this planet, trying to discipline and control and organize this planet, that dynamic of consciousness, of memory, of knowledge, experience, behavior, will always be so. Just like nature, is very, very dynamic, and you might say no one's in control of nature. It's kind of, you might say, nature is self-organizing. It organizes itself. There's no God or manager to organize. There's no ego identity to control the forces of nature, as it were. And I'm afraid that I think consciousness is exactly the same. That people make decisions, and those decisions are, you might say, for each individual making decisions during the day. Literally any individual, they're the best they can do at the moment. They're what they think they want at the moment. They want a certain result at the moment. So you could say every decision is part of the complication. It's part of the complication of social behavior, you might say, or the individual's relationship to society. That those decisions are attempts to solve the problem, but all we can do in consciousness is continually make decisions. So the problem is never resolved. No problem is ever resolved within consciousness, no matter what the problem is. So you could say, even on the level of science, when they're using logic and the rational faculty, and they're controlling the experiment with mathematics and physics, they're in that process of knowledge. They will never be able to control the system they call science. Because if you take numbers like 1, 2, 3, you can extend that infinitely. So you could say the problem in science is infinite. And I would say, in terms of the psyche, in terms of thought and consciousness, in imagination, the problems are infinite. So, and all problems in the psyche, consciousness, and in the world, all problems are part of the wider problem of consciousness itself, of the psyche itself. So in a sense, you can't isolate a problem and solve it perfectly, because all the problems are part of the one problem. So all the problems of thought or knowledge or experience of the psyche, of consciousness, they're all part of a problem that can never be solved, because it's infinite. And in the one, because it's eternal, it's a circle, then it's perfect. And that means that there are no problems, what we call problems. There's no observation, duality and unity. There's no division between people, because there's no identity. An identity, you might say, itself is infinite. So 7 billion people, each with their identity, is each person's identity, by implication, is asserting itself, as it were, in the world, and each identity is making choices And so you might say, when you go around the city, everything's in a kind of complication. And what's extraordinary is something like a city like London, how well it's organised, how it kind of regulates itself, almost like nature. It's almost self-organising because people obey the law. People do the right thing, basically. And so you can move around the city, very complicated city, with very complicated individual choices, as it were. I mean, you're walking along the street, and in a sense, everybody's going in a different direction. Yes, they conform to certain patterns, but everybody is really going in a different direction because each person has autonomy. It's the same in nature. If you see birds, all different kinds of birds in a certain area, they're all doing their own thing, but they keep in order. That's part of the survival mechanism. So people in the city, they all have a goal. They all want to go somewhere, and in order to go somewhere, they've got to cooperate in order to go there. But in the one, self is not going anywhere. There's nowhere to go because wherever you go, you're always one. So meditation isn't a movement in time and space. It's not a movement in behavior or consciousness. It's not a movement in thought. In the world, in relationship to other people, you can't remain in the one. You can't just stay in the one and be, you might say, indifferent to your own behaviour, to your own memory, to your own identity and personality. You can't just treat people as if they're not people. Because if you remained in the one, by implication, you'll be depersonalizing yourself and depersonalizing other people. That's what happens in hierarchy. The higher up people go and get power and authority, the more they depersonalize everybody below. And the epitome of that depersonalization is a war, where the military leaders and the political leaders that may, for expediency purposes, create a war, then like on a chessboard, you've got all the pawns that go out and fight the war, and they're totally depersonalized. They're just numbers, they're just entities, they're just soldiers, and they're totally depersonalized. And that's what happens with people that get power. They depersonalize within industry, they depersonalize within politics, in every sphere of life. And even in religious institutions. You know, if you're in the one and you're self-aware and enlightened, you're not superior, you know, so that you say, that's not my problem. You know, you're in a relationship, you say, and somebody, you know, the person you're in relationship says, you know, you've just done, more or less, you've just done the wrong thing in your behaviour, and you say, well, I'm above that, I'm holy, I'm spiritual, I'm above that. and you're depersonalizing that situation, whereas you should take responsibility for yourself and be a human being, be a person